I was of course humbled and honored when Nahu reached out and asked me about providing this lecture. Just scrolling through here the participants that I see that are attending online, and I know there are other distinguished people here in the room. I'm still feel a little baffled that you asked me, Nahu, but here we are. It's really humbling to be able to do that. And you were saying that when my relation with Tony goes back some 20 plus years. I remember, and if you allow me, I'll just spend a minute describing my first interaction with Tony. I just started my PhD at Linköping University in Sweden. My professor, my supervisor, John Lundqvist, suggested, well, I mean, you're focusing on the Middle East, Israel, Palestine, Israel, Jordan. You should meet and you should interact with Tony. So, of course, I've read his stuff. I happen to be in London because I have relatives there. I went to SOAS, which was then Tony's home at Russell Square. I was very nervous. I knocked at his door. I found a room, and he invited me, as he does. He is always a welcoming personality, and I was probably not very coherently trying to explain what I did. But after that brief interaction, I ended up half a year later as a visiting research student at SOAS, where I met many of those that are either in the room or online. So it's great to reconnect, even if virtually, with all of you. And I can just attest to what I think now you were saying about Tony, his generous personality, his empathy, of course, his intellectual rigor, and you know, he was a master. He was awarded the Stockholm Water Prize, but I think he affected and that was mainly for virtual water. But from my perspective, having worked at SIVA, I also saw how he not only influenced the discourse relating to virtual water and in the sort of global water policy debate, but also the aspects around politics, how that plays into the role. And he being a geographer, he was a geographer that thought, you know, much more broadly than geography as such. Drawing in political economy, and I could see that, and I know, having worked several years at CV, the thinking that Tony sort of spurred on and interjected into the World Water Week actually shaped in many ways the direction that the World Water Week has taken since. And before really going into the actual lecture here today, I was reminded when I was preparing and thinking a bit about Tony and about the lecture too. He always liked to ask his PhD students or anyone who was interacting with him, you know, what's your big idea? What's the big debate you want to contribute to? And that was a way of I guess, for him to help us as PhD students or colleagues to sharpen our ideas. And for me, that really helped, not only through that intellectual exercise that he sort of led us to, but also Tony was, of course, very well connected. He helped me connect me with great other colleagues, academics, policymakers alike, that really spurred on my PhD. So I'm in great depth to him, and also him personally, but also the sort of the culture and the groups of often young academics who wanted to challenge conventional wisdom and brought ideas, all encouraged and cheered on by Tony. So hopefully I'm today gonna bring a little bit of that sort of the big debate thinking that Tony always encouraged us to do. So let me share my screen and see if you can all see my PowerPoint coming up. If now perhaps you can confirm if this is showing in slide mode before I continue.
It's showing in slide mode.
Okay, great, perfect. Thank you. So as Now was saying, I mean, we have plenty of time for interaction and discussion as well. So I'll try to be relatively brief, but covering the main ideas here that I wanted to go through today. One of the topics that's been sort of discussed over the many, the few last decades is, water and conflict, and we'll touch upon that. But is water a source of conflict, a source of war, a source of cooperation? Nahu has among others also in this group helped us understand the sort of multidimensional aspects of conflict and cooperation. So I won't go through the details of that. Nahu and others are better placed to do that. But touching upon a bit in specifically the MENA context, whether water is a victim or a casualty rather than a source of conflict. That's a question. We'll go through that, and it also connects to a so-called flagship report that the World Bank puts out every second year or so on water. And this time we focus that flagship on the issue of water and migration. We felt when we discussed it that, and also looked at the literature, that it was going a bit in different directions, and there was a lack of rigor. And we wanted to start trying in a humble way to put some rigor to this debate. So what we did was to develop a 2-volume flagship report focusing on water and migration. The first volume focusing more at the global level on water migration and development. The second one is more focused on MENA, and that's where I spend most of my time today going through. But I just wanted to highlight a few things from the first volume, which is more looking at sort of econometric analysis and using those quantitative methods as opposed to qualitative mainly. But we wanted to understand better why, who, where, and what aspects of water and migration. Why do water shocks impact migration? Who migrates? And due to water shocks, what are the impacts and where do they occur mostly? And the high-level result is that around 10% of water deficits, so when you have basically droughts, can explain the rise in total migration. And this is based on large data sets, machine learning we used, looking at some 440 million data points, so we feel that these results are relatively robust. And we also came up and understood through this exercise that when there's drought or water deficits, it's 5 more times likely to result in migration than when it's too much water, flooding, etc. And looking at those questions that we would discuss, the why, who, and where, what we saw and what we found at the global level was that migration can work as a release valve when droughts come and induce income shocks, mainly in rural areas. What we also found that often it's not the poorest that are moving. They are often unable to move because they don't have the perhaps wherewithal or resources to do that move, which they would need, but they often get trapped then in a situation where there's too little water and other sort of more capacitated inhabitants of that particular area may be able to move instead. And it also affects who migrates. Often workers moving out of regions with lower rainfall will bring with them lower skills, and also that affects the economic productivity in the regions where they end up, often cities. And where do most of them end up? Often it's a rural urban migration that we see. What we've also seen is that also, of course, the challenges with drought can also hit urban centers, and there is often then a sort of a double migration where people have to leave again. And it affects economic growth negatively when that happens. What can be done? And of course, this is very high level, but I'd like to highlight those 3 things. So it's to protect, to provide, and preserve. And mainly it's to protect the livelihoods in the countries of origin, and that could include general water resources management investments, as well as investments in agriculture that's more climate smart. You can provide hydromet services to be able to follow changes in climate and prepare for those. Both gray and green infrastructure that actually creates a resilience to droughts when they hit it is one. And also you can provide investments that are centered on people, not necessarily societies broadly speaking, but people that you can provide safety nets, you can build human capital through education, you can also integrate migrants in a better way. And then finally preserve, and you can sustain then the resources in the area of the destination, and that includes demand management, better water reallocation, and also better urban planning in those places. So that was volume 1, and now I will go into what's called the ebb and flow, the water in the shadow of conflict in the Middle East and North Africa, and that will deal more on the aspects of water and climate and that nexus together with migration in the case of Middle East and North Africa. And this comes to no surprise to anyone, but I just wanted to remind us that the levels of both refugees in the region, how many that are hosted in the region, but also the massive amounts of internally displaced that are fleeing from armed conflict. And what we're looking at in this particular volume, the volume 2, then are these 3 questions: water as a driver of conflict and cooperation, water as a casualty of conflict, and water as a source of vulnerabilities for those that are fleeing either from the country to another country or are internally displaced. But we're talking here about forced displacement, not economic migrants per se in this volume. If we start to look at water as a driver of conflict and cooperation, I'm sure many of you have followed media reports where there's been a lot of perhaps, in my view, too easily made links between climate change, conflict, and migration. Basically saying something along the lines that the changing climate in Syria led to migration. It wasn't necessarily too much to do with the regime. It's more a natural resource reason for this migration. Also, some research has pointed in this direction. However, we at the World Bank and myself personally, both before joining the World Bank, but also here in the World Bank, think that causality needs to be looked much deeper into. So this is one of the reasons why we actually started to look into Middle East as a specific case study, and actually spent a whole volume looking at this region as a reason for this. And what Francesca de Châtel and others have been highlighting, rightly so, is that if you look at Syria compared to some of the other countries like Jordan, that there was a drought preceding the conflict in Syria. However, that same drought, more or less, was also in Jordan. There was no conflict there. There was a conflict in Syria, and the conclusion that she draws, and that we very much support, is that the aspects of mismanagement or incentivized irrigation and lack of control of demand management and also groundwater pumping led to a situation in which when the drought was longer, there was no preparedness of the country as such to deal with those changes, and that led to migration. So it's not necessarily the climate change and a longer drought, but it's also the lack of preparedness on behalf of a country. In this case, what we're talking about Syria, but it also can happen in other countries. So it speaks to these aspects. We're getting to that later. I hinted at it in the first volume, the need to build resilience to droughts when they occur as a means to both decrease migration, but also sustain livelihoods in the areas where people are actually living and that could continue to live. This will be familiar to probably most of you. We're looking at the aspects of water and cooperation and conflict. And backtracking some 20 years, when I started my PhD, I was under the assumption, it proved to be wrong, that I was going to explain why the next war in the Middle East was going to be about water. I actually ended up trying to explain why, in spite of all the conflict in the region, countries actually do cooperate over water. So this is based on Oregon State University data, PRIO data for the domestic, and it highlights what most of us already know, that most of the interactions are either conflictive or cooperative or neutral, and less so conflictual. However, I also like to highlight here the aspect that often we see a bit of both. And Naho again, and her team in her writing has highlighted this very well. And you see both conflict and cooperation happening at the same time, at various levels perhaps, but it's often present, not least in the Middle East and North Africa region. I also here would like to highlight what I think is one of Tony's most important contributions to the sort of the peace and security conflict. It was not perhaps why he started to work on virtual water, but nevertheless, it actually helped and informed us and pointing us as a discipline, as a group, in the direction of political economy and the sort of the realist perspectives, the functionalist perspectives of international relations, political science. They'd missed this political economy aspect and how that it looked and helped us understand why countries actually were able, through being able to access the global food market, could avoid a potential showdown over shared water resources. Egypt being one example, running out of water, as Tony has pointed out, in the 70s, and that was often used as this is where we will see much more conflict and war. I shouldn't say that we don't have conflict around the Nile. I think it's there, but nevertheless, you haven't seen the level of conflict and definitely not war that was predicted some 20, 30 or 40 years ago. And largely that's due to both the fact that you need to cooperate over and are interdependent on the resource, which I think some of these data points to, but even more so, I think the contribution that Tony spearheaded, perhaps not was his main intention with it, but it actually helps explain that in a very very good way. Then looking at the second question, water as a casualty of conflict. Why and in what context does conflict contribute to water insecurity? Again, we are looking at quantitative data in this, and this is benefiting from the Duke database on water and infrastructure. And you can see that water is increasingly a casualty and a weapon of conflict and is often used. Syria is one example, but you also have Yemen and Libya as other examples. And there is even reports now coming out of Ukraine, still to be verified, but that's also something that's been increasing. So you can see that this is a situation where water is not the source of the conflict, but is used as a tool, and it ends up being a casualty of conflict. And of course, people and mostly so poor people are those that are in harm's way in relation to this. Finally, the third question that we're looking at is water as a source of vulnerability for those that are forcibly displaced in the region, not necessarily those that are moving because of water, because it's in any case moving from where you're staying is a complex decision. Water may be part of it, but often it's more other resources. But nevertheless, they face a number of water risks where they both are living, but also where they may be moving to, and both internally in a country as well as externally. So the vulnerability of people that are moving, internally displaced and refugees, is not only determined by water, but water is a central part of this. Most people that are moving internally or over a border, they end up in camps, in cities or informal settlements where they live or in another country. Camps, and here I'd like to remind everyone that while we see often pictures from the region of camps, which leads to an understanding that perhaps most people that are crossing a border or are internally displaced live in camps. That's not the situation. Most people, about 80% or so, give or take, depending on which country you're talking about, they would be living in host communities. So camps are the exception for refugees. 1 out of 5 that basically lives there. But you have a number of vulnerabilities when you live in camps. There would be flash floods often in camps, not all camps, but many camps do experience that with the associated damage. The household and access to water and sanitation facilities is often hampered because you have to walk, and not only is it quite a distance in some cases, but also you are, especially if you're a girl or a woman, at the risk of being subject to violence when you're going to the water and sanitation facilities in camps. In informal settlements in countries of origin, a number of water-related challenges, of course, sharing facilities with many people, also finding water being too expensive to even be able to pay for, and also the lack of adequate and safe water are some of the challenges that internally displaced people are facing. Similarly, also in informal settlements in countries where people are crossing a border and becoming refugees, a number of challenges that are water-related, relating to contamination, those same water and sanitation risks that I mentioned, because you may be sharing a water and sanitation facility that may not be in your house if you're in a host community. And you also have a basic scarcity of water that's hard to overcome. On top of this, as if this wasn't enough, climate change, which is in the region already, it changes the nature of conflicts in many ways, both blurring the lines between military and civilian. But also, if you are a Syrian refugee that crossed into to Jordan, the demand for labor may decrease because there is less water to be used for irrigation in Jordan, as one example. Some econometric analysis that we've done suggests that unless things are done to overcome the water-related climate change's effects, economies can be reduced. The growth can be reduced by 5 to 6% up till 2050 if nothing is done. So climate change brings just yet another angle to this. However, this is all very bleak and not extremely positive. There are opportunities to build resilience. So water that water provides, and I wanted to touch upon a few of these. And this is basically for policymakers to look at. The actual scale is important. We can't just rebuild national infrastructure and institution, but we often need to start small. Often we tend to go, and the World Bank is also looking at that, to bigger investments, but often it's the right thing is to start small and looking at something that can rebuild the social fabric, the social trust. We often talk about this social contract as a basic necessity to rebuild trust and rebuild a belief in that the state as such can develop. And so really people and area-based interventions are key here. and public works programs to reverse degradation of watersheds and other labor-intensive approaches may be useful in this regard. And often, it's important to also take a regional perspective, because often these challenges are not, as you've seen in the previous slides, are not bound to a country or a nation. They have regional spillovers. So increased regional cooperation to deal with these aspects are important, not only in terms of development, but also in terms of mobility between the different countries in a region under conflict. And policymakers, they need to look not only at the short term, and here what the report finds, and it's corroborated by other work that we've been undertaking as well, is that there is a need to work on prevention and pre-crisis coordination. And the World Bank being a development actor, this I'm speaking to ourselves here, we need to be better in coordinating both with humanitarian actors such as ICRC, UNICEF and others, but also security actors to help build preparedness for fragile situations. We, as the World Bank, we are often working with ministries or water agencies, authorities, etc. That humanitarian actors will do in the cases of conflict. And I'd say we're in the process of developing this. It's still a long way to go, but trying to see how we can come together with the humanitarian actors in a much better way, to see that whatever we are supporting in a country will be something that's easier to link into when there is a humanitarian crisis or a humanitarian situation, and vice versa. The humanitarians are talking to us to make sure that whatever they are putting in place in terms of boreholes to satisfy needs that are immediate as a result of a conflict or a humanitarian disaster, so that's something that can add as building blocks towards something that then development actors such as the World Bank can support. And this is something that we believe can help protracted to respond to protracted forced displacement by this more joined up approach. Also preparing for recovery and return. I think there needs to be realization that conflict and the associated developments and challenges that brings, it changes economic realities, social realities, meaning that some internally displaced or refugees, they may want to return, they may not want to return, they may return after a longer period than expected, and that also that creates new economic opportunities and new economic challenges. So there's a need to better prepare for that rather than reach for those sort of standard approaches whereby one thinks very linear and rather think in a more holistic perspective to take into account those perspectives as well. I think I'll stop there now, and I'm looking forward to interact and listen and be questioned in a typical Tony Allan seminar perspective and ways of working. So I'm handing it back and hoping for great comments and conversation in the next 45 minutes or so. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anders. I think we can give you a round of applause, a live one. You may be able to see the screen or people are clapping. I should also welcome a few more people who have joined online and also into the room. Welcome. I didn't get a chance to introduce myself, but my name is Naho Miramachi. I'm one of the co-directors of the King's Water Center. My other co-director is Katie Meehan. She's also in the room with us, and we're very much looking forward to taking this memorial lecture series forward, as well as further collaboration with you. So I'm thrilled to see all the little chats that have dropped in during Anders' talk, where I've been seeing colleagues from Chile, from Washington, D.C., those of you based in Paris, but originally from Libya. So it's fantastic to see this international collection of great thinkers and critical thinkers around. So I'm going to open the floor to questions, any comments. The Q&A function online is open for those of you who are online, and for those of you who are in the room, please raise your hand and push the red button in front of you so that your microphone goes on. So the floor is open. Any questions, comments? Should we perhaps take a question online? Because I think our in-person audience is a little bit shy. So we have a question online from Daoud Hamidi saying, thanks, Anders, for the very insightful presentation. Could you please also elaborate your personal opinion about the emerging term water as a weapon? So asking you for your opinions about the term water as a weapon.
Okay, thank you. I was just catching up on the chat here. Good to see all the good stuff in the chat. Water as a weapon. Okay, thank you, Daoud. I think what we've seen, and thanks to the great work of Rika Weinthal and others, that increasingly water has been targeted in conflicts and being used as a weapon of sorts. You know, you target infrastructure as a way to subjugate the enemy, and I think we've seen it from different sides. So unfortunately, I think this is something that we will continue to see also over time, and however unfortunate it is. It seems to me that the trend is there, it's increasing. I think that's corroborated by the research and the databases that has been established. So unfortunately, I think it seems to be on the rise, and we need to deal with it. I mean, it's not necessarily the World Bank, but I think it actually begs the question of, how can we build water infrastructure that is, can become less of a target. And I think here there is a lot of thinking that still needs to be done. You can never get away from it fully, but I think there might be certain things that could be possible. I'm not an expert on it, but I think that's something we need to start thinking of as a water community. I mean, however unfortunate that is. Back to you now.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a question in the room, so we're going to ask Nate.
Thanks for the.
Actually, I cannot hear now. I heard Nate in the beginning. Sorry to jump in.
Can you hear me now, Anders?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry. Good to see you, and thanks for the great talk. So I'm Nate Matthews with the Global Resilience Partnership and former student of Tony's as well. So really interesting talk. I wish I had something profound to say in the spirit of Tony, but I'm afraid I don't. But my question was, so thinking to the war in Ukraine at the moment, I believe 30 countries around the world import at least 50% of their grain or wheat from Ukraine and Russia, and a lot of those are in the Middle East. And so have you, in your studies and research, looked at virtual water as a casualty? Because Tony, I think, would look at, a lot of people would see food, but Tony would see that as just a big pile of virtual water, a collection of virtual water. So I was curious if you've explored that at all.
Very timely, Anders.
Thanks, Nate. That's an excellent question, I think. We haven't, I mean, I've been thinking about it, but not necessarily phrased it in this way. But I think that's what we, in many ways, are seeing now. But I think it would be a great thing to dig deeper into. I haven't, though, and I know there are others in the room that may have already started doing that. So if anyone can jump in and also say that would be interesting. I think it would be definitely worthy to look at, and it would be in the spirit of Tony to actually think of this as well.
All right, I think we'll move on to an online question in that case. We have a question from someone anonymous saying, regarding the ongoing water access challenge in the Nile area, what recommendation or approaches have been put forward to date to tackle this challenge?
Thank you. I'm just trying to. Sorry, okay, I'm reading it for myself.
Okay. So for those of you online, it's a question that's saying the water access challenge in the Nile area has been an ongoing challenge. What are the recommendations or approaches that have been put forward to date in tackling this challenge? I presume this participant is referring to issues like the GERD, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, and the various negotiations that have gone on between Sudan, Ethiopia, Egypt, and the wider basin countries.
Right. No, thank you for that question. So I've been in the situation that I have been leading the World Bank's Nile work, or either leading or co-leading for the last 5 years or so. And I think, well, so I'll speak a bit from my official role here. The perspective of the World Bank is that, we've been engaged in the Nile for 20 years or so, responding at first from a request from all the countries to come together and support the development of the Nile. And in spite of all the challenges I think we see today, and I've seen in the last 10 years or so, I'm still of the view, but here, I'm sure others may have other views that are in this call, so please challenge me, that I see the cooperation as a glass half full rather than half empty. If you compare to some 20 years ago, the countries wouldn't even be in the same room, at least not some of them, discussing and even less negotiating on their shared water resources. I mean, today we are in a situation where not all the countries, but many of the countries are coming together. They're deciding on even investments, but also hydromet services that are regional, not only national, that support the coming together of the countries sharing the Nile. So I think it's overall, especially if you take one or two steps back, and a positive trajectory. Of course, recognizing that there are challenges, particularly relating to the Eastern Island and the GERD dam in Ethiopia, that are yet to be overcome by particularly those three countries. But at the same time, I think we've seen a good progress over the last 10 or 20 years. And we have to bear in mind also that these processes takes time. It's not only in the Nile. Processes of cooperation over shared waters takes often decades. And here we talk about the river, a very important river, but with 10 riparian countries. So we cannot expect that to be necessarily an easy and smooth ride all the time. But I think that you can see the interest from the countries in coming together and developing this further. Back to you, Naho.
Great stuff. Thank you for sharing that view of glass half empty versus half full. All right. Any questions from the in-person audience? Yes, we have a question from the right hand. Anders, the camera is angled such that you can't see the sides of the room, but there are people who are just off the screen, and they're going to ask you a question. So you'll just hear them, but may not be able to see them.
I do see that side. So the angle is wider, so it's okay.
All right, it's just me who's not able to see everything. All right.
Hello, my name is Mahmoud Tabakchili. I'm currently working with the EA. I want to ask, how do we view transboundary water being used as a leverage in political and economic discourse? Should it be considered off the table due to the nature of it being a natural resource? As being a human right, or should we treat it like any other natural resource?
Thank you, Mahmoud. Can you repeat? I didn't quite catch it in the beginning. Can you just repeat the first part, if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah, how can we view transboundary water in it's currently being used as a leverage in political and economic negotiations? Is that okay as water being a human right?
Okay. Thank you. No, I that's clear. I think it's hard to get away from transboundary waters being used, as a leverage point in certain political discourse or dialogue. I think it's up to the countries again to decide whichever way that they want to share it. I think the perspective I take is that, unless you manage, you meaning a region or a set of basin countries, unless you manage your transboundary waters collectively, or at least somewhat collaboratively, you're actually putting at risk many of your investments, national as well as regional, because they are often either directly or indirectly dependent on that transboundary water resource. So I guess I'd rather I often throw the question back at the countries. Do you want to risk some of your investments by not coming together around transboundary waters, or do you rather do that and use it as a leverage? It's not for me to say that you should or shouldn't do certain things, but what I think we can do as an institution, and I think as an academic community too, is point to the risk of not doing a proper analysis and critically assessing how you can use, well, unless you address it, what are the risks that carries. And I think when I speak about transboundary waters internally within the World Bank, recognizing that transboundary water management and support to that is not the bread and butter of the World Bank, it's more national projects. I'm always bringing up this aspect of the value proposition for us to actually focus on transboundary waters is that it puts World Bank investments and national development into a challenge, unless there is a coherent way of addressing this. I hope that at least somewhat answered the question.
No, thank you very much.
All right, I think we are having more questions coming in online, so we'll go to some online questions. There's a question from Malik who says, hello, I'm from Saudi Arabia. I'm an IR postgrad student. Can you kindly suggest a solution for the Mesopotamian marshes, Iraq, which is the main source for Furat and Darya, the two main rivers? So do you have any ideas about what can be done to the marshes? Potentially, I'm thinking that Malik is referring to the ecological rehabilitation as well of the marshes.
Okay, thank you. That's a big question. I'm not an expert on this, so I wouldn't try to fool either myself or anyone else that I have a solution for this. However, I think that again, regional cooperation and cooperation across borders is what is needed in that case as well, because it to me it doesn't seem like a national problem. It's not possible to overcome it through an only national approach. So the regional collaboration and looking at the sources of that, well, I'm afraid to say ecological catastrophe or that has happened. Some of which would be national, some would have regional aspects to it. I think that's basically the way forward. And again, I can't unfortunately talk about the sort of the technical details because I know too little about it. What I do know is that both national and regional needs to come together to look at it. and address it in a fruitful manner.
I'll pick up a few more questions from the online audience. So we have one from Max. I just realized that if people can ask their question, they might be able to unmute themselves. So Max Horschmar, are you able to unmute yourself and ask your question, which was about how to rebuild resilience? Perhaps the function doesn't work. Okay, in that case, I will ask your question on your behalf, Max. So it says, you mentioned opportunities to rebuild resilience with the help of water. Can you elaborate, especially the scale social trust elements? What approaches are promising, if any?
Okay, thank you, Mats. Good to see your name, and thanks for the question. What opportunities to rebuild resilience, particularly relating to the social contract? I think what we've seen, not only in MENA but in other places as well, is that often in a fragile situation, when services, including water and sanitation services being a big part of it, if that doesn't function, it sort of erodes the whole social contract, the sort of the legitimacy of the state, if you like, and they often struggle then to maintain order, and it can become a driver of conflict and so on. So if we can support, as the World Bank, but if countries can focus on those basic services as sort of key underpinnings of a social contract between the state and its people, we believe that this is an important part. Not only water related services, but water related services are an important part of that, and we see that can be an important part of maintaining the sort of structure within a society, and a belief that the state is still able to run it somewhat, however imperfectly, but nevertheless. And of course, this is for countries that are under conflict and where they struggle with these services.
All right, maybe some questions from the floor, in-person floor. Yes, Michael, if you could press the button and introduce yourself.
Hi, can you hear me, Anders?
I hear you.
This is Michael Mason, LSC Geography and Middle East Center, LSE. Thanks for that excellent overview of some of the core issues. My question was around talking about the effects of conflict on water infrastructure, and there's been some very interesting work by RCRC and actually some students of Tony's. I'm thinking of people like Mark Saitoon, looking at in particular contexts, Gaza, Iraq, the sort of protracted effects of conflict are less on the physical structures, the treatment plants and so forth, and more the indirect areas of staffing and spare parts and chemicals and so forth. And that's starting to already actually affecting some of the ideas that humanitarian actors employ in these situations. So the question is basically if you're also thinking about that sort of thing in the World Bank in terms of water investments in the MENA region. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Good to see you. With the short answer is yes, we're thinking deeply about these issues. I am engaged, as part of my work also in supporting some of the work that we're undertaking in Gaza. And you're right, it's often not direct hits that are the challenges in Gaza. It's often the indirect consequences. Of course, yes, sometimes there's a hit, and then sometimes the wastewater treatment plants have been hit. They may not have been the target, but they were hit nevertheless, but often not direct targeted. I think we are as the World Bank often in dialogue with like ICRC to see how can we best work in tandem almost, because we are, recognizing that Gaza is going in and out of conflict, it seems. If looking back at the last couple of decades, every 7th year or so, there's a bit of a major conflict. We recognize also and this is thanks to having lots of dialogue with ICRC, that we need to be present as the World Bank, even when conflicts get protracted, because I think it's increasingly so, and I think that's what we see in other parts of the region as well. We are increasingly able to work through UN partners and with UN partners, but also with direct projects in places like Yemen. So I think there is a recognition from our side that we are going to be much more engaged in protracted crisis, which historically it's been the part of the humanitarians, ICRC and others. It's not that we won't necessarily do the humanitarian work, but development work, it seems, and this is still thinking and work in progress, needs to continue, even though there's a sort of simmering conflict going on. So I think that's the direction the World Bank and it seems other development actors are also heading.
Okay, and maybe just jumping on that, Anders, there was a question in the online chat asking, from your experience, could you give a comment insight regarding international foreign intervention on transboundary management in the MENA region? So what do you think has been the track record, sort of elaborating on your response just now?
Okay. So if I understand the question rightly, it's when outside actors outside of the region are coming in and engaging in a conflict setting. My take is always that you can't really, you don't have, unless you're sort of asked and invited to some extent, the likelihood of getting a successful outcome of someone coming from outside is very slim. I think outside expertise can contribute with an expanded horizon, knowledge from other regions, what worked here, can that work here, and so on. And in that sense, perhaps spur dialogue on, but it needs, in my view, also to have to resonate, and for it to resonate, it needs to be something that the countries are interested in pursuing. Having that third party or outside partner coming in and responding to almost like a request from them, because without ownership, I think development, broadly speaking, and it also applies here, I think will be very limited.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions further from the floor, from the in-person audience? No, then I think we'll take a few more from the online questions. So I'm seeing there's quite a lot of questions, and I'm going to try and see if I can pick up on a couple. So there was one from Greg Shapland who asked, thank you, Anders, for an excellent talk. Tony was clear that importance as climate change is as a challenge to maintaining adequate supplies of water to people living in the MENA region. Population increase is an even bigger challenge. What are the best ways of meeting this challenge?
Thank you, Greg. Good to hear from you. Yes, population increases is another challenge. I'd like to talk about socioeconomic and environmental challenges with climate change. Population increase can of course be larger or smaller, and that is indeed a challenge, because there will be either the same amount or roughly the same amount of water, or less, even in some cases, of water to share in in increasing population. So that's definitely a challenge. I think that sort of the general perspectives relating to demand management, efficiency, and yes, irrigation efficiency is one, but that's could be a bit of a double-edged sword. But efficiency in terms of delivering the water, where you have so-called non-revenue water that's unaccounted for, which in some places in MENA ranges from 30 to 50%. It's a relatively easy way to not, take away fully, for sure not, but improve that is certainly a perspective that, or an approach that could help the countries. I think also increasing water. If you look at the GCC region, yes, you can desalinate. That has lots of environmental externalities and also consumes quite a bit of energy, because that's one way. But an even better way is to use some of the wastewater, some which is today treated but not used, and some is not treated at all. And that's a resource that could be used much more efficiently to cover for, yes, population growth, but also to improve the situation overall in a country.
Right. And then there's a question related to that, asking about the Red Dead Sea Canal. So Majed Abu Zreig asked, is there any way to revive the Red Dead Sea Canal to help Jordan cope with extreme water shortages? So will technology and a new innovative project such as the Red Dead work? Okay.
So I haven't been engaged from the World Bank side in the Red Dead. But my understanding, but this is very superficial, is that the Red Dead is not so much of an option as the national Jordanian project, which is not exactly the same, but it has some of the same ideas. So my understanding, again, from afar, is that seems to be the preferred option from Jordan. For Jordan. Overall, whether it's feasible or not, I mean, the World Bank did a feasibility study. It raised a number of challenges. There was an alternative study in which Tony was engaged on behalf of Palestinian Authority that also raised a number of questions and ways to think about this. So I think, is it feasible or not? Well, everything that's in the eye of the beholder. So I mean, one can always look at these reports. I mean, from a technical perspective, yes, it's feasible. It has some challenges, but the costs associated with it, this is something the countries want to cover, or international partners wants to cover. That seemed to be more of the question.
Okay, I think we have a final round of questions. Any more from the floor, the in-person audience? Yes, we have one from Katie. We have one from the, yes, go ahead, please press the red button.
Gina Douglas, Joint School graduate from back in 1962. This is a question about, you talked about ownership. Getting the action down at the ground level, how can we encourage that, and what are the best ways in which we can work through the various charities we support to help people on the ground develop systems for water resilience, water maintenance, water catchment systems, and water reuse systems? Does that make sense?
Yes. It's a big question. No, it's a good question. It's a big question. But let me try. I mean, how can we get ownership on the ground? I think the way the World Bank tries to work is to support projects that really comes from the countries. Ideally, if the processes and the have been set up in the right way, those needs from the ground should be trickled up to whatever becomes a World Bank supported project or supported by someone else. But at least I know that's the way it's happening in many of the cases for the World Bank. And of course, we try to put in place measures to make sure that that's actually true, that's actually what's happened, and sort of work with partners to do that. I think with that said, that may seem, yeah, that's an ideal picture. That may not always work, which is probably true. I think what we've been doing, for example, in the Nile, is to support civil society networks that can bring additional voices from the ground. Specifically on transboundary, we're supporting something called the Nile Basin Discourse, that is like an umbrella organization almost of 600 NGOs and CSOs from the Nile Basin countries, and their collective work is making their way into World Bank projects that are actually supported as the same package of support that goes to the Nile Basin Initiative. So I think that's a way where we can make sure that at least the on the ground voices are better heard. I think there's also much more that we can do, and we're trying to do that. I'm overseeing and leading a trust fund for transboundary waters in Africa, Cooperation in International Waters in Africa, CIVA, and that trust fund has also started to work on much more. We've always worked on it, but much more, hopefully thoughtfully, on gender and social inclusion. How can we make sure that gender perspectives are included in all the perspectives and can actually help transform change, and recognizing that often women, disabled, and others, their perspectives are much less heard than those the traditional male perspectives. I think those are ways in which we can try to get more of the sort of true is a strong word, but real ownership, if you like. So I think we're trying to approach it in different ways to make sure that this is happening, and those are some of the examples by which we are trying to achieve this.
All right. Do we have any final questions from the in-person audience? Katie, go ahead.
Hi, Anders. Thank you very much. This is Katie Meehan. I'm one of the co-directors along with Naho of the Water Center at King's, and we're really grateful for you to give such a terrific lecture today. My question actually pivots back to the opening one around the claim about weaponization, or weaponized, I think you used. I think it's really interesting, and I sympathize with this claim, but I'd like to hear more about the way that you and your team framed weaponized, and how your kind of methodology at arriving at that. My reason for asking is, in work that I've done with, for example, Indigenous water scholars of North America, they point out that, water and water infrastructure has always been weaponized, and that it's often these de jure or legal institutions that have been used to kind of back tribes, for example, in different parts of North America into a corner, and give them very little negotiating leeway and room to sort of assert water rights. So, it's sort of a claim that I want to sympathize or empathize with, but I'm a little bit wary around this idea of it all of a sudden becoming increasing around the world. And so I'm more interested in sort of how your team approaches that, how you're thinking about both the category and your sort of methodology behind that. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. This is what I also love now of getting into an academic setting where concepts get scrutinized. Thank you, really. I think quite honestly, we've been working closely with colleagues from Duke University. They are mainly focusing on the MENA region and looking at not only sort of conflict between states, but also internal. But so we basically use their methodology, and it's more these conflict, active conflict aspects that we are thinking of in our work. So it's not really, if I'm understanding you correctly, the way it's been weaponized in your terminology, to deny rights of perhaps rightful owners to water resources and so on. But this is a way that I need to start ponder about it, because I think we more looked at this international aspects of it, not looking at what you're highlighting. Not to say that that's not important. So again, thank you.
All right, so then I think we'll take one final question from the online, and this will be the last one, and perhaps a very interesting one to end on. It's from Bate, who has asked, Dear Anders, do you perceive asymmetrically powerful riparians in various basins are actually replicating engagement practices and behaviors successfully utilized against weaker riparians elsewhere? So the domination dressed up as cooperation, as coined by Jan Selby in one context, is actually adopted by other hydrohegemons. So this last question really comes back into the final point about power and power asymmetry that Tony was very passionate about towards the latter half of his career, having worked in the MENA region for so long, and understanding that a lot of the times water wars certainly don't happen. It's very much related to the power asymmetries and their various strategies and tactics of control that are used. So I wonder, Anders, I know this is a big question, but I wonder if we can get your thoughts on, is domination dressed up as cooperation still going on and being replicated by various countries?
Okay, thank you. Yes, this is a big question. Thank you, Fuad, for this. So even I, when I wrote my PhD, which is of course now soon 20 years ago since it was finalized, it was about the negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian Authority and Israel and Jordan. I do talk about the power asymmetry. So the way that John Selby has described it, or is describing it, I think it often it has merits for sure. And at the same time, when the World Bank engages in a riparian situation in a basin, of course we are doing it primarily from a development perspective, but at the same time one recognizes that there are power asymmetries either at full or not so full display within a basin. If you look at the Nile countries, yes, there are massive power asymmetries between the more resourced countries and the less resourced countries, and that is relating to human resources, human capital, research capacities, the ability to look at water quality in your country or elsewhere. So what we often try to do, not as part of necessarily a deliberate effort in a basin situation, but what we're trying to do is to strengthen those weaker countries in different ways, to be able to be more engaged in a riparian situation, or that's one of the consequences. Because I believe personally that if you engage on a more similar level, or at least not drastically asymmetrical, the outcome are likely to be more sustainable and long-lasting and positive for both sides, even though it may appear as that may not be the first outcome by some. So I realize that I'm going around the question a little bit, Fuad, so apologies for that. But I think in overall, I think my take on this is that this is happening still. I think there are ways to improve such a situation so that it's more of an equal partnership, because an equal partnership is often better in the long run. And the World Bank, and you're aware of this, Fuad, sometimes highlights some of these challenges. And the World Bank put out a report in 2009, which was on the Palestinian water sector. It highlighted some of these challenges relating to exactly what you're talking about here. So it's not that sometimes there is a seen need from the World Bank to engage in these issues. Sometimes the reports and perspectives are put out to highlight things that may be relating to what you're highlighting here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anders, for taking on such a challenging question at the end of a session like this. I see more questions online. There were some really interesting questions about Central Asia, some more comments about virtual water, and there was a really interesting question about how academics and professionals, practitioners can work together. Unfortunately, we can't answer all of those, but I hope that we can continue this dialogue. For those of you who are in the room, there is some wine and juice and nibbles behind this lecture hall, so you're more than welcome. Please stay on and have a couple of drinks and conversations with others. For those of you online, do keep on connecting with us by email, and we will have more events by the King's Water Centre, which we'd be very happy for you to join. So the conversations will continue. But before I say a final word, I just want to give a big thanks to those of who have supported this event. This event has been in planning for many, many months. So I want to thank the School of Global Affairs. I also want to thank our 3 research assistants, Leah, Diana, and Tamara, and they'll also be helping you go across the courtyard to do a short tour of the Tony Allan Common Room. So please do find them. They'll be just outside the door if you would like to go. But again, thank you so much for your participation. And I would like to close with a final round of applause for Anders. Thank you so much.
Thank you.